Today on the show, we'd like to remind you, dear listener, of what it says in the Constitution. The pursuit of podcasting is an inalienable right of all humans.
True.
And podcasting is, after all, as podcasting does.
Yeah. The Bureau of Sabotage probably has excellent podcasts. Like their podcasting wing is probably so trolly and like...
So good. So good. They're hacking that algorithm to make sure they're always topping the charts for some reason. And you're like, this has 2 reviews.
Yeah, it's stirring the pot. Just constantly like getting people angry at each other. Welcome to Gom Jabbar, your guide to the iconic world of Dune. We'll be exploring the themes, philosophies, and characters found in the sandy depths of this vast universe, from Frank Herbert's groundbreaking novels to the adaptations on film and TV. My name is Leo.
And my name is Abu.
And today, we are talking about Frank Herbert.
Yes, we are.
And something he wrote.
Uh-huh.
As we have been for 4 years. But for the very first time, we are going to be talking about something that isn't Dune.
Wow.
That Frank Herbert wrote.
That's right. We are venturing into his other writings. Specifically, you picked up a copy of a short story collection that brought together many of Frank's short stories.
Yeah.
And we decided, hey, let's crack this open and take a peek at what else Frank has written. Because I think I speak for both of us when I say we've never read anything by Frank beyond Dune.
Nothing.
Beyond the Dune saga.
Yeah.
So it was really interesting to crack open these short stories and get a sense of Frank as a writer beyond just
true.
Frank as the creator of Dune.
Although, I think I can also speak for both of us. Thinking about Dune the whole time?
The whole time.
Every word, I was like, Dune.
Dude, this is so Dune of him, my God.
So Dune-coded? Oh my God. This is giving Dune. You know, it's like Dune. Serving Dune, you know? Well,
totally.
To take care of housekeeping quickly, this is going to be a very fun episode. I'm excited.
It is, yeah.
Today is going to have no spoilers for Dune. Naturally, we're not talking about it, but we are. But we actually are. We are going to make reference to characters and events, but nothing that will spoil anything. So obviously, you will understand more of what we're talking about if you've read all 6 of Frank's books, but we're not going to spoil any of the plot. You can always come back and listen to this episode once you've finished Dune Chapter House.
Right.
We do recommend that you check the show notes for this episode and read these 2 stories before listening today.
Yeah.
I fucked up and I chose a story that was like 35 pages long, which doesn't sound long until you're like 2 pages
so
into
dense.
it and you're like, what the fuck is happening? We could not adequately summarize fully the stories. So we recommend you read them. They're excellent. We have made them available for you. You can also find a copy of, I think the book was called The Worlds of Frank Herbert, which is the 9-story collection. We've read 2 of them. They were both excellent.
They were.
I highly recommend it.
Yeah, for sure. Now, very quickly at the top of the show, a shout out, as always, to our Kwisatz Haderach level patrons, Case Aiken, Daniel, Dion, Roman, Caballo, Jonathan, Lambert, and C.R. Spruill. My goodness, not only are y'all incredibly generous patron supporters, but I hear through the grapevine that you are also top of your class saboteur extraordinaires.
Yes, you are.
Causing mayhem everywhere you go.
It's true. Your reputations precede you.
Yes, your reputations precede you for that flamboyant obstructionism. Keep doing you. Thank you so much for your support. Of course, our gratitude also extends to all of our patrons and all of our listeners who support at every level. The show is made possible because of all of you.
Indeed it is. So here's the game plan for today's episode. We're going to talk about Abu, your story that you chose, which is called Mating Call.
Caw-caw.
After kind of like summary and takeaways, we will talk about my selection, which was called The Tactful Saboteur.
That's right.
And then, of course, throughout, it's worth admitting that we're just going to be talking about Dune the whole time. Like comparing like themes and kind of little details, but also just talking about like the sci-fi of it all, which is very
Yeah,
cool.
yeah. They're excellent stories in and of themselves, too.
Very enjoyable. Okay, well, before we get into the first story, we're going to rally ourselves. We're going to gather our energy and
That's
prepare
right.
for these two worlds of Frank Herbert. Don't go anywhere, dear listener. We'll be right back right after this short break.
Welcome back, everyone. Let's get into the first short story by Frank Herbert that we selected today. This one's called Mating Call.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so getting into Mating Call, let me quickly summarize the story
Sure.
for our listeners and for you, Leo. Of course, as we said at the top of the show, we do recommend you read the stories. It'll help you understand today's conversation that much more.
Right.
And Mating Call is actually quite short. I picked the short one because I didn't have a lot of time this week, but this
Yeah.
one I believe was only like 14, 15 pages.
Yeah.
So a nice quick one. So, Mating Call. We join social anthropological service scientist Lacania Wilkinson
Uh-huh.
and Marie Metal, who are on the planet Rookup
Mm-hmm.
to study the breeding habits of its native population. And their primary objective here is to basically study, observe, and work alongside these natives to figure out why their birth rates have suddenly and precipitously dropped out of nowhere. And the Rookup representative, Grafka, the local that they're working with, is the entire reason this mission was taken on. He appealed to the High Council for help, and it's explained to us that, quote, the introduction of foreign music has disrupted some valence of their reproductive cycles, end quote.
Yeah.
Now, there's a lot of tension when it comes to this mission to Rookup because the expedition kind of has the eyes of Galactic Society laser focused on it. In particular, because of the recent disaster, we're told, on a planet called Monglagal. So, as the story goes, humans arrived on Monglagal and ignorantly killed off a species of insects that they thought were nothing burgers, without realizing that these insects were actually integral to the native population's reproduction cycle. And so, basically, because of their carelessness, humans arrived on this planet and caused the extinction of the Monglagal locals. Whoops.
Which, yeah, happens all the
that
fucking
happens.
time. Yeah,
Right.
for sure.
We're doing that here on planet Earth right now, and this is our planet,
Totally.
Imagine a totally different planet. So, as Marie, one of our main characters, as Marie explains, now there is intense pressure on this Rookup expedition to not fuck up so spectacularly again.
Right. Yeah.
Quote, after Monglagal, practically every sentient race in the universe is looking on Rookup as a final test case. If we mess up another race with our meddling, end quote, she kind of drifts off here.
Yeah.
And Lacania jumps in. Her response is so problematic, but also thematically resonant to this story.
Yeah.
Lacania jumps in with, quote, meddling? Young woman, the social anthropological service is a holy calling, erasing ignorance, helping the backward races, end quote.
Those backward races better thank us. Better thank us humans. We are the best.
Big yikes from Lacania here for sure.
Lacania is terrible. The whole
Yes,
story is just
the whole
like,
story.
fuck this person. She's but
She's so awful.
she's such a Korba,
Such a Korba. And of course, she is such a high-ranking scientist within
Of
the
course.
anthropological service as well.
Yeah.
Kind of speaks to bureaucracy and the folks who rise that corporate ladder.
Totally.
Now, on the planet, these two have been trying to work with the locals for a frustrating 25 weeks. They've been here for a long time now and have made basically no progress in trying to solve the puzzle of this birth rate decline. Additionally, it doesn't help that the locals are extremely shy and resistant to talking about breeding, sexuality. It makes them very uncomfortable to talk about these things within their culture. So trying to solve this puzzle with strangers they don't know is a difficult task. When this story picks up, the locals are about to have what they call the Big Sing. It is seemingly some sort of giant reproductive orgy
Yeah.
for these creatures. It's a way for them to reproduce. But they are refusing to allow the scientists to come for some unknown reason.
Right.
Lacania, extremely frustrated by this. She's super rude to Grafka in this conversation. Marie, of course, is much more gentle and open and trying to be understanding. But Lacania basically bullies her way into an invitation. She's like, Grafka, you son of a bitch, invite us to the Big Sing. We can't help you fix the birth rates if you don't invite us to the big sex orgy.
I want to go to the sex orgy. Let us come.
So Grafka is kind of like, it's not the safest for you to attend this, I guess. But if you really want to, like, you're being pushy about this. So he does ultimately relent. And so Lacania gets super excited. They gather their equipment and go to the Big Sing. Now, at the event, the scientists witness this like beautiful and serene ceremony of song that really enchants Marie with its like symphonic beauty.
Yeah.
It all sort of like culminates and rises to a crescendo, and then boop, nothing. Just pure silence. No one is having sex. Like everyone just gathered in this spot for the Big Sing and sang a big song. But nobody seems to be like, fucking to have more babies.
Right. And then they kind of like
orgy.
shuffle off. They just like disperse. They're like, all right, good sing, everyone. See you on Monday. It's like, what's happening?
Did we just attend a choir practice? Because we were promised like hedonistic sex acts.
Yeah.
And all we got was like just choir.
I do love Grafka though coming over and being like, that was so good.
Oh my God.
Like cigarette in one of his 5 prehensile legs. Just like, was that good for y'all? Oh, it was good for me.
Yeah. It's so funny, right? He's like tired and very sleepy
at
the end of this.
Same Grafka.
Yeah, totally.
I get it.
I've been there. So as you said, once this large group dissipates, sleepy Grafka walks over and he tries to explain that this was actually a very successful Big Sing ceremony for them. Thanks to these past 25 weeks of their interaction with Marie and Lacania, and in particular, Marie teaching them how to learn this foreign music that was introduced to their planet, it's helped them make this Big Sing the most powerful one ever. This has been amazing. Grafka's like, yo, everyone got pregnant.
Yeah. Oh, yes.
And Marie has sort of been connecting the dots throughout this ritual, and it all finally clicks in place for her when Grafka's like, this was awesome, we did it, thank you so much for your help.
Yeah.
She's like, oh no.
Oh, fuck.
Oh, fuck. She puts 2 and 2 together and realizes that, herself included, every woman who was listening to this broadcast, because, by the way, this broadcast got hijacked by, like, pirate radio and blasted across the empire.
Right.
Every woman who was tuning in and listening to the music has been impregnated.
If they are able to be impregnated.
Lacania is too old to have children, so she was not impregnated by the music. But if you are of normal birthing age and listen to this song, you're about to have a baby.
Boom. Yeah.
Boom. Except it's not that simple. After this realization, Grafka basically shows them how the locals have babies. Yes, they start with eggs, just like humans start with eggs. But Grafka instantly splits in 2 right in front of them, like shreds down the middle, splits in 2, and 2 like baby Grafkas are there. And then they both waddle off and walk away. And thus, we learn how the locals reproduce. And it's at that very moment that Marie begins to, shall we say, have a splitting headache?
It's so horrifying.
End scene. That's the end of the story, is when she has a splitting headache.
Oh my God.
Whew.
Oh, yeah. What a fucking terrible. I mean, terrible in like, it's so good. What
Such a good short story.
Great story. What an impactful ending. Like, that line hits like a truck.
Yes.
Because naturally, they're hearing, like, the medical person on the ship that they're in communications with is, like,
Right.
kind of realized and was like, oh, shit, we should all take pregnancy tests.
Yes.
And they do. And then there's this sort of, like, realization that the child born is going to have half the number of, like, gametes or, like, half the number of genes because
Right.
it's just you. There's no other.
Yes.
So they're probably going to be sterile, and it's going to be all this kind of interesting thing. And sure enough, the pregnancy tests are coming back positive.
Yep.
So my first thought was like, oh, so it is like a conventional pregnancy where, like, the humans who can get pregnant are pregnant in the human way.
Yep.
But
then our boy Grafka splits in two right in front of us.
and then I realized maybe, you remember we were talking about, like, the Egyptian pregnancy test?
Yeah.
A lot of pregnancy tests work by detecting a growth hormone. So whether or not you have a baby in the uterus, or like you've conceived in that way,
Yeah.
if you are going through growth hormones because you're about to split in two, might also trigger positive. I thought about this all day at work, and it was not a productive day.
Horrifying stuff. I mean, the reality, to put it in very stark terms, like this very, like, horror twist at the end, is every single woman across the galaxy who heard this and has been impregnated is about to split in two and die.
Yeah, or something.
Something.
And I think that's this is the joy of Frank Herbert, right? Is that, like, he doesn't lay it out exactly. He's not like, and then this happened. It sort of lets us imagine and talk about it.
I think the implication clearly is that these won't be normal pregnancies, regardless, and that this is a doomed fate for every single woman across the galaxy who tuned into this very popular radio broadcast, right? Because everyone is already tuning in after the Monglagal affair. Right. The eyes of the Empire are on this mission. So tough look here. Now, getting into some of the themes and ideas, as Dune fans, I'm sure our listeners have picked up on some similar themes here as well, but we can see shades of what later would make its way into Dune, right? Imperialism, the idea of a more powerful group coming in and working with an oppressed indigenous culture. Very clear vibes there between the Great Houses and the Fremen. There's also lots of questions about breeding and how different species breed and repopulate. Mm-hmm. There's also the central question of, like, dropping birth rates and how that could potentially lead to extinction. All themes that we see throughout the Dune saga as well. Frank's sort of got a thing for breeding, clearly. Now, what I really liked in this story in particular, though, I was kind of taken aback by the overt examples of racism, particularly from Lacania, basically. Like, Lacania is our racist scientist who hates the locals and just wants to solve this problem.
It's really, truly her calling. It's like, I'm going to be an anthropologist. And you're like, cool. Because you like, love
empathy,
culture? And she's like, no, fuck culture. Culture is the worst.
I was really impressed with some of the nuanced presentations of racist ideas that I think even to this day people overlook and brush aside as like, oh, that's not racist, that's just ignorant. There are moments in this story where Lacania says things like, ugh, I wish these Rook-Up locals talked like us. I can barely fucking understand them. Because they kind of talk in this, like, sing-songy way.
Yeah.
And Grafka has made the effort to learn, presumably English or whatever, so that he can speak to the scientists. But Lacania is, like, barely making any effort to learn their sing-song voice. Right. She just keeps asking him to talk in English. And as someone who grew up with parents who have very thick accents because they lived in Pakistan their whole lives and had to learn English through books, this is something like I've experienced, you know? Knowing how I have just a Midwest English accent compared to my parents who have lived here for 20, 30 years now, but still have accents in their English because they learned it in a different way. And that's not something you just shed after a certain amount of time. This is something that I think a lot of underrepresented groups face. This idea of like, oh, well, we'd accept you if you just talked more like us. You know, like, why are you talking weird like that?
Right.
And it's not just accents, right? Like, that's something that I've personally dealt with. But for example, for Black communities, they've also faced this sort of like well, I wish you would talk more like us rather than
Yeah.
like the African American vernacular English, that's
Yeah,
like
yeah.
commonplace among communities. So I was kind of like, wow, Frank, good job, buddy.
Yeah.
Like, you really nailed that on the head, this like confrontation of language. There's also some other things that Lacania says. At one point, she says, oh, well, you know how it is, Marie. When you deal with the locals, you just got to have a firm grip.
Yeah.
You have to be the calm, collected one with the iron fist, and that's how you keep these unruly locals in line. And of course, again, anyone who has dealt with, I don't know, perhaps the US government
Yeah.
and is part of an underrepresented group has faced this.
Yeah.
Oh, you are being ridiculous and demanding these certain rights. Let us be the calm, collected ones with a firm grip. We got to keep you in line.
Right.
Very clear racism vibes there. Couple other quick things I wanted to shout out. Lacania throughout this whole short story is basically blaming the Rookup locals for everything that's happening to them. A common racist trope. Blame the underrepresented group for being an underrepresented group. It wasn't us that oppressed you. You're kind of doing this to yourself.
Right.
Pick yourself up from your bootstraps. What's so hard about that? All of those vibes very present here.
Yeah. The whole line she has where they're like, well, they should have told us. It's like,
Yes.
What the fuck are you talking about? Like,
right.
it's like saying the Native Americans, the first tribes, the indigenous, should have told us that they didn't have immune systems that would handle like European viruses. Right. It's like, fuck off. What the hell are you talking about?
Yeah. Damn, y'all aren't immune to smallpox? You didn't tell us.
Yeah, it sounds like
be our fault that we wiped your ass out.
It's so brutal. Lacania is awful.
Lacania, truly awful. And then, of course, throughout this whole story, and especially in her conversations with Grafka, she basically is just like not taking anything he says at face value.
Yeah.
And assuming she knows better.
Yeah.
He says, don't come to the big sing. It's probably not safe for you to.
Yeah.
And Marie's kind of like, should we listen? Like, he's trying to tell us something here.
She's like,
and Lacania's like, I know we have to go to the big sing so that I can fix your problem. It's this very like holier than thou.
Which if they hadn't fucking gone, the problem was fixed.
It was literally already fixed. Marie fixed it.
It was fixed already. If they had just been like, okay, we'll skip this one and go to the next one. We have permission. Dope. Let us know how it goes. We'll go to the next one.
Right.
Would have been
or
fun.
Trust Grafka, give him the equipment and be like, can you record for us? And
something.
Trust Grafka to report accurately back his own life and feelings and culture,
no.
Instead of being like, we know better, we must instill our rules upon you. I'm like repeating myself here, but like the racism vibes, the oppressor vibes, the imperialistic vibes are layered all throughout this story. And Lacania basically embodies all of these things that anyone who's been on the receiving end of that racism has dealt with. Impressive stuff. I really enjoyed this part of the story that Frank was laying it out so explicitly. Yeah. And again, a story written in
61.
61.
When it was published, yeah.
And again, not that the 1960s have any excuse for racism, but certainly something that wasn't in the popular conversation in the way it is today.
Yeah.
Now, the other big idea that I'm actually really interested to talk to you about is something that I've been talking about over on the Science Fiction Book Club podcast with OPSA, because we've been reading the Three Body Problem chapter by chapter on that show. And that's a first contact story. And first contact is kind of a central idea in this short story by Frank as well.
Yeah.
Monglegal went horribly fucking wrong because humans fumbled the ball with first contact with this species. Rookup kind of going horribly wrong in the other way because we once again fumbled first contact here and fucked up the lines of communication. And I was doing a bit of research on first contact for a recent episode on Science Fiction Book Club, and I wanted to share some quotes from this BBC article I found because this article talked about the different types of contact scenario. How could humans get in touch with alien life, and what would those scenarios look like? And the one that's relevant to this short story is the scenario wherein we somehow come across a primitive alien species and that we are the more intelligent ones.
Right.
And in that super rare case, from the article, Susan Blackmore, who is a writer and visiting professor at the University of Plymouth in the UK, told the BBC this, quote, "Could aliens suffer Blackmore asks. If so, we should have some moral obligation towards them, and perhaps even build legal frameworks on the basis of this. End quote. And the article goes on to basically explain that that legal framework and that moral obligation doesn't exist, has not ever been written down anywhere. Sure. And the only legal framework that humanity currently has in regard to any sort of like activity in space or first contact or communications in space has to just do with how we communicate with each other. Quote, all 5 of the major space treaties center around what humans do in space and how this affects other humans, end quote, as the article clarifies. And this really makes me think of much of our science fiction and much of our storytelling about first contact with aliens and how this question becomes central, regardless of the situation. I think most famously, it makes me think of the Prime Directive in Star Trek, the basic premise in Star Trek that we, the advanced utopian human society, if we come across a primitive species, you have to make sure to never interfere. And this becomes sort of a point of drama in the films as well. I forget if it was Into Darkness, one of the more recent films. It literally, the opening scene is Captain Kirk fucking with the indigenous population by accident, and Spock being like, yo, why did you let them see you?
Yeah.
We're supposed to not fuck with the Prime Directive says don't mess with an indigenous culture because our tampering could alter the course of their planet forever. And we could unintentionally, like Mongoligal, wipe them out because we're too powerful or something, you know?
Right.
So it's super, super interesting stuff. And ultimately, a lot of experts from that BBC article did agree that whether we meet alien life or not, communication is going to be the toughest thing to figure out. It is going to be the central challenge of communication with an outside species that isn't human. And we see that here in Frank's short story as well. That communication utterly breaks down. Lacania's own ignorance and outright racism results in perhaps the very graphic death of many women across the entire galaxy. And so it's really fun to think about first contact scenarios in this way, and also how challenging it will actually be in reality. You know, it won't play out like it does in a lot of movies and TV shows where we just immediately are able to communicate with the aliens.
Yeah. I think one of the themes that I see across all of Frank's writings is just how much humanity and how much the human experience is still the focus of everything. And I think sci-fi is a fantastic playground to explore what does it mean to be human and how do we move forward. And we have evolved as a species to be communally focused. People who can work more within the constraints of societal expectations tend to benefit better. And that is his own form of Darwinian survival of the fittest and all of that, versus outliers who might not have an opportunity to procreate.
Yeah.
So that's one thing. I think we have, if we encounter life elsewhere in the universe, there is an implicit, we have evolved to be collaborative with like-abilitied powers, basically.
Right.
And we haven't had to put it in those terms before, but like the implicit incentive is to collaborate and to grow from, rather than like, I don't know, conquer. We'd be fucked. Like 99,
well and truly,
99 times out of 100, we are the losing one in that encounter. I think the other thing is like communication is, in the broadest sense, the only way that two kind of conscious entities can exchange anything. And so, it's like, of course, these are the key things with first contact. These are the key elements of truly coming down to understanding one another. We'll get into my story as well, but in that story, in The Tactful Saboteur, there's a question of, we've been in contact for a long time and we've come to a place of homeostasis, but we've never had to deal with the legalities of like these pieces of your biology as it works with our law.
Yeah.
And now we have to do that. That's like a whole new layer on the onion. You haven't peeled that away yet. It's fascinating. But I think it's also you say all of the major treaties center around what humans do in space. I'm like, yeah, we're not out here like, what if a guinea pig was on the moon though? Like, what are they gonna, makes sense. And I'm sure it's just a matter of, we'll just change it to grade 3 species
Yeah.
have
Yeah.
to do X, Y, and Z. Yeah.
So you're optimistic that we would work with an outside? Like, I'm curious what you think a first contact scenario for humanity looks like, realistically speaking.
Yeah, I've read all of the Great Barrier, the Great Filter theories, the Dark Forest theories, the various, there are so many ways in which we should be very, very cautious with interacting with anything beyond the fact that, we have an idea of what life is, and that could be totally based on our planet and the biologies that grew out of this planet. We meet a nitrogen-based life form, and it's like, what does that even
Right.
Maybe we can't even perceive them. Maybe they exist in some sort of interdimensional thing,
Yeah,
that we're
completely.
just seeing the shadow they cast on this physical reality. There's so many things. So I am optimistic that while some portion of humanity will always be literally the worst and will always be like, the mirror, humans first.
Yeah,
oh, Earth is, there will also be the people who are like, the way forward is one of collaboration or avoidance or caution. And that portion of humanity, I think, is going to do better than the ones who are like, we got guns. We're going to we'll shoot them up. It's like,
Right. And the alien in the 11th dimension is like, we don't even perceive your bullets. Like, what are you talking about?
yeah,
You simply can't nuke us.
you haven't invented that yet. And they're like, give us time. And the scientists who would invent that were like, no, it's a terrible idea. So, yeah, I think it's realistically, it's so far off just statistically when you're looking at the size of the galaxy and where we're at. Probably not going to be something worth considering for another, few thousand years.
Yeah.
10,000 years. Depends on how quickly we
procrastinated a couple centuries, I think. We're fine.
Yeah, we've got it. We'll kick that can down the road.
Deal with it when it gets here,
I think we are more likely to wipe ourselves out entirely by accident or some other cosmic, existential thing.
Yeah.
I think that is more likely before encountering a species that's advanced enough to actually cross paths with us.
Yeah.
I think the idea of us accidentally making a uncontainable black hole in some lab somewhere.
Whoops.
Oh shit, or there was a very real moment where
it's that scientist trying to make an 11th dimension nuke and accidentally making a black hole that sucks
making
the
a 10th
planet
dimension
Earth
nuke,
into-
and we know how problematic that is, But also we had a president for a minute who was calling the North Korean Kim Jong-un little rocket man. Push your big red button. I'll push mine, bitch.
Yeah.
Come on, let's do it. And it's
Totally.
I'm so pessimistic about some of the things in the human species. I'm like, I don't even know if I'm worried yet.
Yeah.
Fair. Could be fun. Maybe it would be unifying. It could be like Ozymandias and Watchmen.
Yes.
Gives us a chance to come together as a species, and we go,
Yeah.
oh wow.
Yeah. What's funny though is there's two thoughts of camps around that too.
Yeah.
Where in this BBC article and actually in the 3 Body book we were discussing, there's this idea that any sort of human contact would actually destroy human society. It would tear us apart because we would fall into so many different camps about how do we deal with it. Some people would worship them, some people would want to fight them, some people would want to cooperate, some people would kill themselves out of fear because they don't want to be slaves to an alien overlord. There's that camp as well where rather than being unifying, the knowledge that aliens are out there would actually break human society apart.
Yeah. I think the breaking apart, it's punctuated equilibrium, right? It's you would have this moment that human society as we know it is changed forever because how could it not be? And it's torn apart and people are factions and fighting and blah, blah, blah. But then 100 years out, from that moment, what is left? And if you're saying every human has become extinct because society crumbled because of blah, 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 okay, that's one possibility for sure. But I think a more likely possibility is the people in power would kind of have their camps, and those camps would persist. And
Yeah.
maybe the better camps that are benefited in some way. Like if there's a team of humans going, we should be friends with them, and then they immediately become like slave, like I don't know, miners in the galactic eighth dimension mines.
Right.
They're like, oh shit, this sucks. Obviously, that camp is not doing very well, and the camp
Right.
of humans who are like, we're gonna go hide on Mars and build up an arsenal just in case.
So, sort of like a cosmic Darwinian, like
100%.
the survivors would survive and thrive by like their chosen survival mechanism.
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah. No,
We
that's
as a
totally
species are like cockroaches. It would be hard to get rid of us, I think.
fair. Very true. Very true. Well, regardless of whether alien contact happens and whether we'll be more Marie or more Lacania, I think it's still super fun to like ponder these
Totally.
big questions. And
Yeah.
that's why I love science fiction stories, and the way Frank in particular tackled this one. It just makes you think, regardless of whether alien contact will even happen in our lifetimes or that's just something we keep kicking down the road. It's still worth considering. And I think science fiction, what it does so well is sort of reflect reality back on ourselves, right?
Totally. Yeah.
How we treat the aliens is also a reflection of how we treat each other. And that's where these themes of like racism and even these ecological themes, right? Not only how we treat each other, humans, but also how we treat each other, the animals on this
Totally.
planet,
Yeah.
who are in many ways totally alien from us, right?
Yeah. Totally.
Like there are creatures in the fucking sea we don't know about. They might as well be aliens,
yeah.
but we sure as hell are also killing them by accident through
Yeah.
global warming. So
Fucking octopuses, dude. They are the
octopuses.
coolest goddamn species on this planet.
and so smart.
They're so smart. And I saw there was a video recently of some deep sea biologists, and it looks like a bell pepper. And they're like, what the fuck is that? And it turned out to be an octopus. Just like one of these like very, very deep sea, kind of like the Dumbo octopuses that have the ears that they flap.
Yes.
And it's like, bro, that shit's in the ocean. So fucking cool. They're so smart. Unreal.
Unreal.
That's so cool.
Unreal. So even if it doesn't involve alien life as we consider it, little green men from Mars, I think stories like this and what Frank is sort of getting at is be the Maries of the world,
Yeah,
right?
totally.
Take the time to learn, communicate, understand, be cautious, take it slow, take it steady, and check your own ignorance at the door.
Yeah.
Because it could backfire on you. And I think that is particularly important when we think about our own planet and the species on it as well, when it comes to the climate crisis and how we treat and preserve our fellow inhabitants of planet Earth,
Yeah.
many of whom we have inadvertently and some intentionally completely wiped out of existence.
Yeah.
That's what really strikes me about science fiction stories. It makes you think about not only the what ifs of alien life, but also makes you reflect on what we are doing now on planet Earth.
Totally. Yeah. Be the Maries of the world. Be a musician. Appreciate good singing. The best. She's like
Love-
choral music
okay.
connoisseur. She's like, oh, the harmonies. It's so great. The vibrato. Whoa.
Right.
It's so
Right. Yeah, much like you, every holiday season,
yeah.
she's caroling. You know,
Yeah,
she
she's out
joins-
there.
She joins a troop.
Her
and-
Dickensian garb. She's like singing those Christmas carols. Yeah. And you know, at the end of the day, the aliens are just the friends you made along the way. Isn't that
Absolutely.
always the case?
That's the lesson. That's the lesson. Or the overlords you've been oppressed by along the way.
That
depending
classic
on
saying.
which camp you fall into.
At the end of the day, they're just the overlords who oppressed you along the way. I feel like that was a different saying at some point.
Right. Okay, well, that's our first story. A lot of fun discussion there, I think, out of just a 15-page short story. And I think, again, speaks to Frank's caliber as a writer
Yeah.
and storyteller, that he was able to get us to chat so much from a short little story about Lacania, Marie, and our guy Grafka.
Yeah, Grafka.
All right, well, we have another short story that we definitely want to get to.
Mhm.
But before we dive in, let's take another break, collect ourselves, and prepare for some sabotage.
Ooh,
We'll see you in a minute.
it's a good ad toss. Welcome back, everybody. Oh, buckle up. Get your troublemaker hat on. We're talking about the tactful saboteur.
Mm,
Well, to get through the summary of this story as quickly as possible, it's dense.
it is.
The tactful saboteur follows George McKee, a saboteur extraordinary at the Department of Sabotage, an organization founded to keep government from being too efficient, basically.
Amazing.
Like,
Amazing concept.
There was this description in the story of this terrible time that the government was so efficient, they would like pass new legislation within an hour. And it was just like, I didn't even fully get the problem with that. But they were
then
like,
also retract it within the next hour. Like it was
Right.
too fast.
yes. I guess that's the issue. So they were like, we need things to progress at like a human pace. So
Right.
Department of Sabotage was founded.
Amazing.
Now, the story begins as McKee is meeting with his boss, the Secretary of Sabotage, head of the organization, Clinton Watt, to discuss a missing colleague. He's kind of been assigned to investigate a missing colleague, another saboteur extraordinary named Napoleon Dune. Fucking awesome name.
Yeah.
Who
lame.
is actually not human in the classical sense. He is a pan-specie species, alien life form.
Right.
Now, Bill Dune had been investigating the Tax Watchers, which is another organization, kind of just seems like the IRS, like the
The IRS,
intergalactic
basically.
IRS, when he went missing. Now, McKee has an idea. He's like, I think I know where Bill Dune is. But in addition to saying, I think I know where Bill Dune is, he's fucking with Clinton Watt, with his boss.
Yeah.
He's blasting him with a jacuzzi stem,
Uh-huh.
which gives him a like Medusa head of rainbow wriggling tendrils all over his head as a form of sabotage,
Yeah.
but is also absolutely trolling, is also just like utterly fucking with him.
Yeah.
Now, McKee runs off. He's like, I'm going to go investigate Bill Dune. And Watt's like, don't, you can't. And McKee is like, well, then I quit. And Watt's like, you know, you're not allowed to quit unless you have
You
like,
got to have a reason
have
to
a
quit.
reason
You
to
can't
quit.
just quit. It's suspicious if you just quit.
yeah. So he blasts him with the stem, leaves, and goes off to investigate Bill Dune. And then Clinton is like, well, I'm going to fire him.
Right.
And I have to resign because this is embarrassing as fuck. And thus, McKee is kind of cool to go investigate the tax watchers.
Yeah. Right. McKee kind of gave him the reason to fire him, the thing he wanted anyway.
Yeah.
But then later in the story, it also sort of implies that if you are the secretary,
Yeah.
your agents are always sort of trolling you and fucking with you
Yeah.
and trying to like sabotage you and kick you out of the job. It's like a test.
Because if you're
Yeah.
sabotaged,
Then you're not good enough.
then you're not good enough, and they get your position.
They can't get your job, right?
And there's those like legal formality where you have to be fired before you can then be elected into that role.
Yeah.
So it's fun to revisit the beginning of this story, having read the whole story, because already we can see that McKee is sussing out what Bill Dune did.
Totally.
And this is him sabotaging Watt as a plan within a plan. Again,
Yeah.
thinking about Dune constantly.
Right, right.
But nevertheless, in our timeline, McKee is now meeting with the head of the tax watchers, another panspeci, kind of, named Panther Bolin.
Nice.
Very cool name as well.
Naming my child Panther.
Panther is such a fucking cool name. Hi, the name's Panther. Panther? No.
No.
Panther.
Panther.
Hell yeah.
Panther is a far.
Panther is a far. Fuck, that goes hard. That's a wildly cool name.
Right. I'm half Muslim and half panspeci.
Hell yeah. I always suspected. Glad to be a crash mate, dude. Glad to be a crash mate.
Indeed.
Now, the meeting is so tense, very, very
Yeah.
fraught, with lots of hints as to the myriad ways that McKee could literally die. Like,
Yeah.
he's like, oh, fuck, I should have come here with someone. And Panther's like, you know, I respect that you came here willing to die for this conversation. And McKee's like, yeah, yes, I'm happy to be here.
Yep.
But the whole time, what he's doing is he's sort of like very delicately dancing through what are implied to be very rigorous sort of etiquette rules that the panspeci have. So it's like,
Yes.
you have to observe certain behaviors, and if you don't, you could offend and you could be killed. And the whole time, he answers questions weirdly, back and forth, feels very awkward, but every time, Panther's like, you're doing great. Holy
Yeah.
shit, you really
Yeah.
understand the Panspeci. Like, way to go. Now, they are, unfortunately, sitting in chair dogs.
Ugh.
It's like, dogs that are semi-sentient, like chairs that you sit
Yes.
in and you pet them so that they conform to your body.
Right. They kind of cuddle you.
The fucking worst. And
It's truly the worst.
truly the worst thing that Frank ever made. And he put into so many stories. It's
right. Unnecessary.
It's poor.
Frank, why?
It is fucking awful, man. The two are discussing Bill Dune's disappearance. Now, Panther Bolin is like, don't worry. Bill Dune does not need any assistance at this time. He's good. Actually, they're good because there's like 5 genders within the Panspeci species. It's all very, very interesting and cool. So Bill Dune, they're good. They're doing well. Don't worry about them. Which confirms McKee's theory that Bill Dune has indeed moved on to the next stage of the 5 life cycle stage of the Panspeci basically process.
Yeah.
Which also means Bill Dune lied to Clinton Watt and said, oh, yeah, I have another 15 years in this life cycle.
Yeah.
And Clinton Watt's like, cool. And then he disappears. It's like,
amazing.
It's very, very cool. Now, through this conversation, it also comes out that Bolin intends to put a Panspeci at the head of the Bureau of Sabotage.
Hello.
So one of our species is going to be at the head of this organization. And there is a question then of why. Is it to continue the operations of the Bureau of Sabotage, or is it to dissolve the organization? Because, of course, the tax watchers want to be immune to sabotage themselves. They don't want to be fucked with. They just want to take your money, and that be it,
Yep.
Through the conversation, McKee realizes he's been told too much to be let go. So there's this moment of like, oh shit, I will be killed, or I have to play this very carefully. So only through his deep knowledge of the Panspeci hospitality rules, he brings out the only thing that could be considered a weapon, and he destroys it. And he goes, now without a weapon, I am fully dependent on your hospitality, and thus you have a deep cultural obligation to keep me safe.
Yes.
It's very cool.
Very smart.
He avoids being killed, which is very fun to watch. And he also is grilled, being in this place of vulnerability. He very openly talks about the intricacies of the Bureau of Sabotage, and it's fucking awesome.
Incredible stuff.
The conversation's so good. It reads like Terry Pratchett. 10 years before Terry Pratchett.
Yeah.
So if you've read any Terry Pratchett books, this feels very like a Terry Pratchett novel. It's great.
It does.
Now, McKee is arrested. Basically, it's determined that even just this conversation is an attempt of sabotage.
Right.
And because of that, and there's been this court mandate that during this whole court thing, they can't fuck with the tax watchers. He is technically fucking with the tax watchers, but it's instructed that he be kept safe as they prepare for the court date where they're going to talk about all this.
Which I found really interesting because as an agent of this sabotage bureau, you do kind of run the risk of always being accused of sabotaging,
All the
You're just
time.
Trying to order coffee and the coffee maker's like, are you trying to...
You trying to sabotage me?
You playing funny games with me, boy?
Yeah. I just want coffee, hold the water. It's like, what? Oh, am I being sabotaged? Yeah. Oh, no.
Yeah. Which, I mean, to be fair, I think McKee is most definitely sabotaging, but I just found it kind of funny that, you could end up in a court trial because you're not even doing your job, but just because of your job title.
Well, in this conversation, because McKee's internal thoughts are like, I got to get out of here with what
He's panicking.
He's like, I wanted to learn something and I learned it, and now I need to get the fuck out of here.
Yeah.
So I get the impression he is very used to this because they're like, we're arresting you for sabotage. And he's like, yeah, fair.
Not again.
Okay. Yep. Sure. That sounds right. Even if we know he wasn't in this exact instance, it seems like, yes, he is always going to be sabotaging things. He's a troublemaker, as he admits.
That's right.
So very, very fun to see for sure.
Yeah, true. Good point.
Now, in court, we rejoin some familiar characters. We're with Watt, McKee, and Bolin. But also, we have presiding Judge Edwin Dooley and the lawyers, iconic names, Huljance Von Broek.
I love it.
And Pander Ulson.
Amazing.
Excellent. And McKee immediately derails the trial. Immediately, they don't get 2 sentences into the trial, and he's already fucking him. And to your point, the prosecutor is like, you can't let him talk, because if he's talking, he's sabotaging.
Right.
And he's like, no, I'm not. And Dooley it's just enough for Dooley to be like, no, I want to hear what he has to say and whatever.
Yeah. He's full on doing the like, I only represent myself, actually.
Yeah.
This guy, Olson, is not my attorney.
Yeah.
Because I no longer work at the agency.
So
he doesn't represent me.
That's the thing, right? Because he's like, I request that I'm not represented as part of this defense. And the judge is like, I don't advise that. And he's like, well, Your Honor, I'm actually not even with the agency.
Right.
Because at the moment that I was speaking with Bolin, I was not an agent. I had been fired. And Dooley's like, oh, yeah, wait, that is a little... Okay, so that does... Yeah, get out of here. You're not being prosecuted. What?
Right. Amazing.
It's incredible. And then Dooley realizes...
He was a freelance troublemaker.
He was just fucking with people for fun. Now, Dooley realizes at a moment, he's like, wait, did he just play me? Like, did he didn't want... Oh, wow, that went the way he wanted it to. Oh, okay, I have to be careful with that one.
Amazing.
But McKee is like, actually, Your Honor, can I... He's not even in the defense box anymore. He's like, can I be a friend of the court and just provide super helpful information? Because I suspect you will want to hear what I have to say.
Amazing.
And fancy words aside, he's clearly up to something. And of course, as we finish this story, we will see that this has all been kind of an elaborate 5D chess game. Basically, all of the facts of this trial are wrong. They're all based on misinformation, and it's all very, very technical. How the Bureau of Sabotage, which is a very secretive organization in their intricacies and like how they work, that is all secret. The Panspeci species has some like biological things that just no one knows about, which also complicates everything. And setting the record straight actually requires, to something I said when we were talking about the mating call, requires that they work out how legality of human court systems work with Panspeci biology.
Yeah.
Basically, the Panspeci, they have this like 5-cycle lifespan where for like 20, 25 years, they are in like a sentient state where they are basically humanoid. They can like engage with humans, they can talk, they can, they have agency, they have intention and desires and blah, blah, blah. Panther Bolin is in this phase. But they are within a creche mate of other Panspeci. And when it is time for you to move on to the next life cycle, which is like a semi-sentient nurse drone sort of thing, where you like take care of young, when it's time to move into that, you pass the ego onto one of the other Panspeci in your creche. So it's very like Reverend Mothers transferring information from one to the next.
Totally.
And the reality is, Bill Dune, the Panspeci, set up all of this shit to happen, like days before moving on to the next life cycle, and then passed their ego and their intellect and their intention and everything to Panther Bolin.
Yep.
So the question is, legally, is Panther Bolin, having inherited the intentionality, the personality, the information, is Panther legally Bill Dune?
Right. Can we try him legally as another person?
As a different person, because that person passed everything to them. It is truly Reverend Romalo fucking did some shit legally.
Right.
And then, dies and passes everything to Jessica. And now we're like, is Jessica culpable? Like, what do we do?
Right. Totally.
It's so cool. But the reality is the Panspeci, not for any malicious reasons, culturally, they do not talk about this stuff, especially with outsiders. So Panther Bolin, throughout this trial, becomes more and more agitated, is literally on the edge of killing McKee for talking about this publicly. Yeah. Also because this is also a broadcast trial. The eyes are on this trial. It's very big. The Bureau of Sabotage is a piece of the galactic civilization. Yeah. And this is a question of whether or not it'll be dissolved, basically. There's also this like implication. Panther Bolin has a weapon. The Panspeci apparently just have a weapon that they can kill people with. Reminds me a little bit of the Honored Matres. from the scattering. So anyway, food for thought. Nevertheless, there's a very real possibility of Bolin killing McKee. And even the presiding judge is like, I think I just have to let that happen if it happens. Like, I hope it doesn't, but let's see how it plays out. Now, McKee handles the situation perfectly. He basically convinces Bolin, like, yes, this is the most egregious, worst thing that I could do to your species, to air out all of these biological facts in like a public court. This is such a violation of your entire species. But you have to admit that you know it had to happen eventually. And doing it this way will give credibility to your species, and it's like the best way to do it versus some alternative.
It'll set a precedent now in a legal like court case that can be utilized later. Like it's, it won't come out in a way that's uncontrollable or the narrative, you lose the thread of the narrative. Like, this is the safest way for this to come out.
Yeah, exactly. And as part of this airing, he makes it clear to the judge. He's like, imagine we filmed and recorded and detailed every moment of intimacy between you and your wife, and then we're telling everyone about it using the worst vulgar words we could. Just like I was standing here using every 4-letter word is how he says it. And you have a way of killing me. Can you tell me that you wouldn't?
Right.
And the judge is like, oh my God, like, oh, I get it. And this is what McKee is saying, going, that is what Bolin is doing right now, is he's avoiding killing me, even though I'm violating him and his species.
His privacy and
Yeah.
Right.
And
although I like to imagine Woolie's also like, I mean, if you want to see me fucking my wife, onlyfans.com/Woolie,
Oh, this is a hypothetical. Let me put my phone away. I was going to show you. I'm kind of into it. You're not. Okay, sorry, that was hype. I misread this situation. And then, of course, Bolin kind of seems like appreciates that. There's a real sense that is also, people recognize the universe's record of this court trial is of Bolin's ability to restrain themselves, basically.
Yeah.
So yes, Bolin holds back. And basically, McKee points out Bill Dune, by setting all of this in motion, that was an act of sabotage. And in fact, it was such a grand act of sabotage that Bill Dune should inherit the role of the head of the agency, of the Bureau of Sabotage.
Yeah.
And because panspeci biology is what it is, that means Panther Bolin is actually the one who should be the head of the agency, and I support that.
Amazing.
And there's this question of like, why do you support that? And McKee explains, like, the panspeci, because of their biology and because of how their life cycles work, culturally, they are a deeply society-minded species. Like they are, and it again reminds me of like the Fremen being very like the needs of the tribe over the needs of the self.
Yep.
So they are uniquely qualified to be in charge of this agency that exists purely to help society function better. Much more than humans, at the very least. Because again, we see Clinton Watt is like emotional. He's this firecracker of a dude, and he fucks up, and he's clearly outmaneuvered.
I was just going to say, like, we spoke about the seeming like meritocracy within this bureau. If you want to be the secretary, you got to prove you're the best sabotager out there, the biggest troublemaker out there. And Napoleon Bill Dune proved himself. He just long conned everybody. So, of course, he's earned the right to be secretary now.
It's so fucking cool. It's very like those heist movies where you don't realize that the whole thing's been a setup the whole time.
Yes.
It's so satisfying. And then it's fun to go back and read the first few pages where you have McKee and you're going, how much does he know now? Like, how much does he suspect? How much of it's kind of clicked into place? And then why is he sabotaging the head if he suspects that Bill Dune has already sabotaged the head, saboteur? It's so fascinating. It's so much fun.
Yeah.
And
such a great story.
Basically, the story pretty much ends there, heavily implying that Bill Dune will take up his new role as the Secretary of Sabotage. There's this line about his eyes glittering with all of the mischief that he's going to commit and the revenge he's going to take. I didn't exactly understand the revenge against whom, but there are some things that are explicitly clear in this story, and then there are other things that are a little bit left up to interpretation.
Right.
I also, for anybody out there, listeners, who fully understand this story, maybe if you read it back in the 60s and you've had time to think about it, the line that it ends on, what did he really mean by that, is such a funny callback, and it comes up a few times.
A few times, right.
And that line so basically, McKee says, okay, you're going to be head, but remember, you, the secretary, will have no immunities from sabotage whatsoever.
Right.
And Bolin responds, but the secretary's legal orders carrying out his constitutional functions must be obeyed by all agents. And McKee's like, yeah, you get it. All of the rest of them, myself included, are like, what?
Repeat that last part again?
Oh, okay. Yeah. Wait, there's a deeper meaning, though, I think. I'm not 100%. So, anyway.
Yeah. It feels like a bit of a catch-22 to me,
Is the implication then that he could set a legal order to prevent himself from being fucked with? Or is it more, I understand that I can be fucked with, but it is in exchange for this power to set legal orders for the galaxy for these saboteurs?
Yeah.
Like,
Right.
There's a few ways that I can interpret that. But again, it's calling back to the anecdote that McKee tells Bolin, which is about the two... And I actually thought this was very funny. The two
workers who cross paths every morning as they go to work.
Yeah.
And they never speak to each other except one day. One of them is like, good morning. And the other one doesn't respond and then looks back and is like,
what did he mean
by that?
What did he mean by good morning? It's so good.
Again, speaks to Frank's caliber as a writer, but to set up the what did he mean by that as the central question of this whole story. Because we could apply that to basically every line of dialogue in this story. Yeah. What did McKee actually mean by that? Is he sabotaging? Is he not? What did Bill Dune mean by that? Is Watt playing some larger game here? Bill Dune clearly played a larger game. So it's fun. It's like throwing everything into question in a story about sabotage and chaos.
It's so good. I mean, so yeah, let's talk broadly about this story, just kind of the themes. And specifically because, again, I just thought about Dune the whole time. The subject similarities, because it's
right.
wild. So first, this is government and bureaucracy, right? Like we just finished our book club of God Emperor of Dune, and it's like,
right.
Oh my God, observations of government and what is the role of government and bureaucracy and aristocrats and like all of this stuff.
Yeah.
It just feels like Leto to Atreides as written by Terry Pratchett. Like that's just how it feels.
And remember, this is in the 60s, right? This short story, maybe 64?
Yeah, I think 64.
We looked it up.
So this is the year before Dune.
Right. So like God Emperor is still easily like a decade plus away.
Yeah.
And Frank is already playing around with the very ideas that make Leto to who he is in that book.
Totally. And just a very different tone, different setting. There's aliens. It's like a very different universe than Dune. Yeah. And there's all these like tech gadgets, like, the sort of
the jacuzzi stem.
The jacuzzi stem, just so good. Yeah, that whole thing. There's the sword of justice that the judge has, and he's on like a levitating like throne. And then there's all these like, there's so much. Oh yeah, and then like after the jacuzzi stem, in just a throwaway sentence, Clinton Watt like dematerializes the locked door with like a little thing. He throws the thing at the door dematerializes and he rolls through the hole. It's like, what the fuck is happening? And this was also, by the way, I'll just say, I was reminded of the first time I read Dune, where I tried when I first read Dune to understand everything right away, and it was torture. But as soon as I just let it kind of play out and let you let go, you just kind of let the shape be presented to you broadly, knowing that you can always come back to it and like reabsorb the specific details. I had such a blast. But I fell into the same fucking trap again because I know Dune so well now that I can pick apart those intricacies. In this new universe, I was like, what the fuck is happening? I hate this. And then as soon as I just relaxed and was like, listen, it'll make sense eventually.
Yep.
I'm not going to worry about that random piece of tech that was just named. We'll come back to it, right? Kwisatz Haderach? Whatever. That'll make sense eventually. Mm-hmm. It does, or it's not important. And it's very, very cool. So
yeah.
Again, subject similarities to Dune. There's also this kind of plans within plans, right? What did he really mean by that? Is that sort of thesis. Everyone's double speaking all the time. And although initially it makes the story feel really inaccessible because I'm like, oh fuck, I want to know what the hidden meaning is, and I just don't have enough information to suss that out yet. Nothing is what it seems. The story ends up having a ton of depth for that reason, and it's fun to reread. And it's just like Dune in so many ways in that sense.
Yeah.
The strange culture is another kind of thing that I think is similar, where in Dune, we're discovering the Fremen traditions and the Fremen culture through Paul and Jessica, as well as the Tleilaxu. And we discover, slowly we unravel the mysteries of the Honored Matre or whoever, right? Like the people, it's this process of discovery. And that is what it feels like with the Panspeki. It also very much felt like McKee's interview with Bolin felt so much like Jessica talking to Shadout Mapes, right? This sort of flying by the seat of your pants on the edge of tragedy at all moments, right?
Yeah.
So important also in what we were talking about in the previous story, this idea of communication, right?
Yeah, completely. I found it interesting. Both of us picked these stories without knowing what the other picked, basically. Like, we didn't have knowledge going in. And I like that we both kind of came out with stories where communication or the lack thereof is like a central conflict point.
Yeah.
For this one, of course, it's trying to understand the Panspeki and McKee having to have that conversation and try not to die by insulting them.
Yeah.
And then, of course, later on, this larger understanding of legality and how Panspeki biology plays into human legal systems. That's all like a process of communication and understanding.
Totally. Yeah.
Something that Lacania perhaps would never fuck with,
Yeah.
but Marie would definitely try to understand.
Yes.
I liked that through line between both of these stories.
Yeah. Again, it really feels like 2 points on a timeline of species integrating into a single system. Like Gafka and Gafka's people, naturally that is earlier on the timeline. They're still kind of getting to know each other. There's like the process of, we don't really know anything about each other. And there's secrecy for sure, but it's an early process. Versus this is much later. The Panspeki are in organizations. The head of the IRS is Panspeki, but there are still unknowns and there's still tension between these two species.
Right. It's the question of like the first contact challenges versus the long-term integration challenges.
Right.
And those are two different balls of yarn to untangle. And both present different communication hurdles to overcome.
There is a question that is addressed in this story in particular, which is, what does it mean to be human? There's actually a couple of moments. I was trying to find one quickly. Well, Dooley says at one point, I owe allegiances to law, yes, but my tyrannic fellows depend on me too. Distinguishing of the humans, because Bolin at one point says, we are humans together. Human is a term that has changed in this universe to include what we would consider extraterrestrial life. But there are extraterrestrial humans. And this is actually I didn't even write this in the notes, but that's kind of a Bene Gesserit idea, is human, capital H, is a matter of control and agency and participation in society versus a genetic distinguishing thing. It's not a species anymore. It's a qualification of like, do you participate in this society? And if you do, you're human, even if you have different biology. Which also might speak to maybe there's other stuff happening with humanity. Like with the Spacing Guild navigators, can we say they're still human? Of course they are. But what does it mean to be human anymore?
Right. Ship of Theseus. How much can we strip away before it's not this ship anymore?
Yeah.
And what do we, in the legal system, perhaps in this story, still consider within the bounds of that legal system? And where do our loyalties lie? With the original ship or the new version of it that's been reconstructed?
So good. And when the ship splits in two and becomes two smaller ships of Theseus, after hearing that beautiful song,
yes.
First of all, does ships survive? Can you split a ship in half? Yeah.
History would tell us no.
History would tell us no. We can only find out by moving forward.
That's right. That's right.
This conversation about like, where do these species, how do you integrate fully? The idea of xenophobia. Yeah, even that idea of like racism that's integral into a system, right? And the amount of people who are like, well, we solved racism. It's not real anymore. And then you look at like bank loans being denied, and you go, oh, that's still a problem, you know?
Yep.
So the idea of even Dooley being like, oh, well, my preference for tyrannic humans is not really a problem. And then Bolin turning to McKee and going, I apologize, McKee. I thought all of this, us airing our biology, the Panspecky biology, was unnecessary. What is the exact quote? Sir McKee, it is I who apologize to you. I had not realized how deeply xenophobia penetrated your fellows.
Yeah.
It's a realization of like, oh, shit, these folks really don't trust us. And this was necessary. I see your point. I apologize for almost killing you like 2 minutes ago. McKee's like, no worries, dude. Happens all the time. I'm a troublemaker. I'm used to death threats.
Truly, though.
The broad topics, I'll wrap up quickly. There's also gender kind of plays a big thing. There's this whole thing about the Panspecky having five or six genders or something. And this idea, there's a point where McKee is struggling to, he's kind of like hesitant to use any gender pronoun. And Bolin's like, I appreciate that you are not using certain pronouns.
Yeah.
Because that shows that you understand Panspecky being not constrained to those boxes that like tyrannic humans have, basically.
Right. A conversation we're having now, 60 years after this book was written.
This is so cool. Very, very cool. Feels very applicable for sure. Also, pro tip for anybody out there who has like people in their lives who are non-binary trans. Pro tip, just use their pronouns more often. Use it more often. Makes it much easier. Like, come up with reasons to use them.
Yeah.
I'm just telling you, if you're like, and it's kind of confusing to me, find out someone's pronouns, use them. Use those pronouns. It'll make it so much easier to ingrain that. Anyway, just as a side note, because my God, I've seen people struggle with it for like 10 years. They'll have a relative who's non-binary, and it'll be like a decade, literally, of like, I still fuck up sometimes. Why? Practice.
Yeah.
Practice makes perfect.
I mean, some of that is still just like bigotry. That's just like, I still fuck up sometimes because I don't care to practice.
Yeah.
Like I don't care to put in the effort to correct this and learn.
I will give the ultimate benefit of the doubt. If you out there mess up sometimes, I know you care about the people in your life. Practice more. Just practice more. That's it. Anyway, enough of my virtue signaling. So that's the gender stuff. And then finally, the half-explained mysteries. This idea, Frank Herbert does not lay out everything about this story. I'm not sure I fully understand. I tried some web searches to be like, can someone explain this to me? And ultimately, I couldn't find anything that fully satisfied a feeling of understanding every word of this story. And I think that's kind of a hallmark of Frank's writings, right? You reread God Emperor of Dune a third time, and you're like, oh shit, I didn't get this whole thing. That's wild. And then even at the end of that, you still feel maybe there's more there, which is very cool.
Yeah. I mean, there's the whole jacuzzi species, of which we only see one tool used, right? The stem. But they are an entire species in and of themselves. So there's more than one alien in this galaxy, in this short story. The Panspecky and the humans are the only two we interact with. But there's even just like throwaway reference to the jacuzzi, who seem to be like very socially awkward.
I fucking love the jacuzzi based on this story. Because you're right. So this gets into the next piece of my analysis, which is the specific smaller details. And the jacuzzi is one of them because you're right. They are like socially awkward tleilaxu with ultimate social anxiety. Just like,
love it.
There's a description that to get permission from the jacuzzi or to like become friends with the jacuzzi and to be on their good side, they have to like work up the trust with you. And they will rehearse a question for potentially years before they present it to you. And he says, quote, they may even build a nerve image of you upon which to test their petition. End quote.
Incredible.
They're like, we're going to clone you and have this conversation 1,000 times to make sure we don't fuck it up when we're actually having a conversation with you.
Yep.
It's like,
love it.
Oh my
Love
God. They're so polite.
It's me standing in front of the mirror before every social engagement, practicing my small talk questions,
exactly.
You know? How are the kids? How's the wife? How are
the kids? Oh,
job?
It's too rough. How
How
are the kids? No,
How are the
Why did I go so high? Okay.
How's the wife?
How's your wife? Okay, why did I growl? That was not.
Exactly. I am the jacuzzi.
The jacuzzi are all of us. It's true. The other details, I called this out earlier, but like the Panspecky transferring ego memories feels very like Bene Gesserit.
Totally.
And of course, the chair dogs. 20
Gross.
years before they appear in the Dune universe, they were already in Frank's stories.
That's right. I wanted to very quickly call out, I loved the short story, and we were chatting earlier about the Terry Pratchettness of it all.
Yeah.
There's a particular exchange between Boleyn and McKee when they're speaking about the work that the Bureau does. We're getting sort of exposition through this conversation about the Bureau of Sabotage, and I wanted to share this. So maybe you play McKee, play your troublemaker role, and I'll play Boleyn in this quote here. Quote, "The public pays for this Bureau? In essence, the public is paying people to cause trouble?"
Isn't that what we do when we hire police, tax investigators, and the like? McKee asked.
Mic drop. End quote.
Fucking insane. So
Frank
good.
Herbert, tell us how you really feel. Amazing stuff. And as we said earlier, like these are some of the seeds of the ideas that we later see much more fleshed out in stories like God Emperor of Dune. But clearly things that have been on Frank's mind decades before he wrote those stories.
Yeah, from that same conversation, sabotage, Bolin sneered, in lieu of red tape. Also, as McKee says, no task too small for sabotage, no task too large. We keep the wheel turning slowly and smoothly. Some anonymous corpseman put it into words a long time ago. When in doubt, delay the big ones and speed the little ones.
Amazing.
It's so good.
Just these big ideas about government and politics, and we see them reflected in the Dune story as well. And it's clearly, from the short story, been on Frank's mind for a long, long time. Fun to see.
It's so good. So, yeah, overall takeaways. I had such a blast reading this story.
Same.
I fucking loved it. I had to reread sections a couple of times, but this is also 1960s Frank, so feels par for the course.
Yeah.
Again, I think sci-fi is a great playground within which to explore what it means to be human, and this idea of like tyrannic humans versus non-tyrannic humans, and the idea of humanity evolving as a term that includes non-biologically human humans is very cool. And I think is something that might happen eventually, right? Like 10,000 years from now, if we've encountered other species and we're able to cohabitate in a universe, for sure, we would start to work on what are the terms that we use to address all of us. And maybe if we are the more advanced species, maybe that is human. Maybe human is the word. Now, Frank is also having a ton of fun with this writing, and I wanted to highlight a quote that I loved, which is a description of the defense lawyer, Pander Olson. Quote, "Olson was a great thug of a figure, in defense white, with glistening eyes, under beetle brows, and a face fashioned mostly of scars." End quote.
Amazing.
Fucking spectacular. A face fashioned mostly of scars? Get out of here, Frank. You're having so much fun. I love it. It's the best. And then I'll also say, and this is wrapping up, this story is apparently one of 3 stories that all take place in the same universe. And apparently McKee shows up in one of the other stories as well. And this is called the consentiency universe, which is the sort of thing. And actually exists as one of 3 universes that Frank established. One with the writing friend of his, Dune, of course, being the second one, and then this being the third one that he's created. So I kind of think we should come back to look at all 3 stories like as the consentiency universe and see maybe how that universe juxtaposes against Dune more broadly. But I'll turn it to you, dear listener. If that sounds like something you want us to talk about, if you like the consentiency universe or the other 2 stories, let us know. Email us. And yeah, we might come back and talk about McKee again. I think that'd be a lot of fun.
Yeah, I'd love to. McKee, that rogue.
That rogue. That
Shades of Malky, you know.
Oh, what a ne'er-do-well. How often do well?
Ne'er-do-well. Ne'er. All right, well, that wraps up the 2 short stories by Frank Herbert that we wanted to chat about today. Of course, the book that we pulled these from has, how many you said? 9 total?
9, yeah.
So there are still 7 others that we haven't touched. And like Leo was saying, if you'd like us to get into other Frank Herbert works, occasionally here and there, sprinkle it in perhaps during the lull in between book club series, things like that, definitely let us know. This was a ton of fun, and I would love to dive back into the adventures of McKee.
Yeah.
And the Conscientia universe.
Same.
But as we're wrapping up, of course, we want to remind you of a couple of ways to keep in touch and a couple of ways to support this show. The 2 best ways to help ensure that Gom Jabbar continues to thrive and grow for years to come is to become a patron and check out our merch store. That's patreon.com/GomJabbar for ad-free episodes, bonus content, early book clubs, and it's gomjabbarshop.com to get yourself some of that sweet merch.
Yeah.
Rumor has it that Leo is drafting up some new merch designs too, so keep an eye out.
I've got 3 in mind for maybe a total of 7 or 8 new things.
I saw the early drafts. They look cool. Check those links out in the show notes. Become a patron, get yourself something nice from the merch store, and help this show continue to thrive.
Indeed. And, of course, we love to hear from you. Email us, gomjabbarpodcast@gmail.com. We read every email, even if it takes us, I checked, we have some unread emails from almost a year ago. So we're working on it. But we do read every email, and we try our best to respond to every single one, as unmanageable a task as that is. It's just the 2 of us. But we would love to hear your thoughts, your questions. We want to see pictures of your cute pets. Of course, you can also post those in the Discord. gomjabbarpodcast@gmail.com. Send us your ideas. What do you think they meant by, what did he really mean by that? I want to know. What does this fucking story mean? Tell me.
Yeah, and in fact, tell us what good morning means too, because I've been wondering.
Yeah.
My coworkers keep saying it to me.
Yeah.
All the time.
And I make nerve images of them to like practice responses, but it just nothing feels right, you know?
Nothing feels right.
Good morning? Good morning. Good.
I truly need your help. gomjabbarpodcast@gmail.com, please. What does good morning mean to you?
What does that really mean?
Friends, there is no real ending. It's just the place where you stop the recording. But this podcast is always one step beyond logic, so help spread the word of Muad'Dib and leave us a review on Apple Podcasts and Spotify. And be sure to check out the other shows on the Lore Party Podcast Network on loreparty.com. You can also follow us on Twitter and Instagram at @lore_party. And we're also on TikTok at Gom Jabbar Podcast. Thank you so much for listening. And remember, whoever controls the podcast controls the universe. We'll see you at the next Bureau meeting.